Hello again, everybody, and God be with you. Well, last week's story was all about Judas, one of the baddies in the Easter story. And as we go through Lent, we've got another story about a baddie in the Easter story. This one is called The Politician's Tale, the story of Pilate. And Bob Hartman introduces the story this way. Sometimes it's hard to know exactly what a biblical character was like. You piece together the information as best you can, but you're still not sure you've captured the person. Take Pilate, for example, the Roman governor who presided over the trial and execution of Jesus. Some people have seen him as basically a good man who got caught in a difficult situation. Others have pictured him as weak and indecisive. Personally, I think the clue to his character lies in something he said to Jesus. I have come to tell the truth, Jesus explained during his trial, and all Pilate could say in return was, "What is truth?" You see, there are some people who try hard to live by what they believe is true, and there are others that fail to do that. But the really scary people are the ones who don't believe that there is any truth, any right or wrong at all. I think that's the kind of person Pilate was. And even though you may find him charming and amusing, his disregard for any truth beyond himself may well make him the baddest baddie of them all. And the story goes like this. Pilate rubbed his hands together and smiled at his new assistant. "Well then, are we ready to get to work?" Marcus smiled politely in return and nodded. "Yes, Governor. And may I say what a pleasure it is to be working for someone who truly seems to enjoy his job." Pilate winked and gave the young man a knowing look. "Excellent," he grinned. "Butter up the boss on your very first day." "Someone's taught you well, my boy." "Oh, no, I meant it, sir," Marcus responded. "Some of my past employers just seem to be putting in their time, waiting for that next holiday or the retirement villa by the sea." "Ah, yes," Pilate nodded. "I know the type. I've worked for a few myself, but I can assure you that things are different here. I like what I do. It's difficult sometimes, and it's always risky. But for my money, it's still the best game in town." "Game, sir?" asked Marcus. "What else would you call it?" said Pilate, dropping down into his chair. "Keep the peace, keep the revenues rolling in, keep Caesar happy. Those are the official rules." "And the object of the game as well," Marcus added. Pilate chuckled. "No, my boy. The object of the game is for yours truly to keep his job, and with any luck, to keep climbing up that empire-sized ladder." Marcus looked a bit confused now. "But, sir, what about duty? What about justice? What about right and wrong?" Pilate's chuckle grew into a laugh. "Oh, you do have a lot to learn, don't you?" Then he stood up on his chair and stuck his arms straight out from the sides. "I've always thought it was a bit like walking on an aqueduct." "An aqueduct, sir?" Pilate peered down at his assistant. "You mean to tell me you've never walked on an aqueduct? Why, when I was a boy growing up in the Roman countryside, there was nothing I enjoyed better. My friends and I would climb up on top of the tallest one we could find. The water would be rushing down the middle, faster than any river, but along the stonework at the edge there was just enough room to walk." "But wasn't that dangerous, sir?" "Of course it was dangerous. That was the point. Fall off one side and you'd smash your head on the ground below. Fall off the other side and the water would carry you halfway to Sicily before they could fish you out. But if you held your arms out just right, leaning a little this way and a little that way, and watching carefully for which way the wind was blowing, Then you could do it and not get killed. That's what it's like being the governor of Palestine. A little justice here, a little oppression there, a touch of mercy, a hint of brutality. It's all the same, really, just so long as you keep your balance, just so long as you don't fall off. And you enjoy that, sir? More than anything, my boy, Pilate grinned. Then he hopped onto the floor and plopped back down into his chair. Every day is different, every day an adventure. So let's see what today brings. Secretary, he called, send in the first appointment. A short, round, bald-headed man stuck his head into the room. I'm terribly sorry, Governor, he apologised, but I'm afraid you're going to have to come into the courtyard for this one. It's another one of their holy days, and they say they'll be defiled if they come into the building. Yes, yes, Pilate sighed. I know the drill. But the look on Marcus's face suggested that he did not. Defiled, sir? He asked. It's a religious thing, Pilate explained. The Jews are obsessed with this notion that they are God's special people, which of course makes the rest of us somewhat less special. So they are forbidden to have any close contact with us, to come into our homes, for example, in case it makes them unfit to participate in their religious rituals. That's the gist, anyway. So what do we do? Marcus asked. We humour them, Pilate answered, sticking out his arms again and tiptoeing forward. It's all about balance, remember? Our little walk into the courtyard will make the Jewish leaders happy. And I don't know about you, but I could use the exercise. And then Pilate chuckled. As they say, when in Jerusalem. But what do you think they want, sir? Marcus asked. Publius? Pilate inquired, turning to his secretary. And the secretary just rolled his eyes. It's another Messiah, Governor. Pilate clapped his hands together happily. Excellent! Did you hear that, Marcus? Another Messiah. Oh, we should be finished by lunch. A Messiah, sir? Marcus asked. I'm afraid. Oh, yes, of course, you're new. And then Pilate stopped for a moment. The Messiah is a Jewish legend, the Christ, the anointed one, the King of the Jews. It's all the same, and it all has to do with their belief that one day their God will send a powerful leader to set them free from their enemies. Their enemies? Asked Marcus. And that would be us. Yes, that's right, Pilate grinned. And I take it as a sign of our efficiency as conquerors and overlords that so many of these messiahs have been popping up recently. Oh, I suppose we dealt with, one a month? At least, sir, moaned Publius. A nuisance, if you ask me, sir. Yes, well, you have to deal with the paperwork, don't you? I, on the other hand, only have to deal with the messiahs. And frankly, I find them quite fun. Fun, sir? Asked Publius and Marcus together. Of course. Messiahs come in two basic shapes, you see. The hairy, undernourished, wide-eyed, fanatically religious shape, and the don't you turn your back on me or I'll stick a knife in your neck political revolutionary shape. Now, the first kind is no trouble at all. You listen to them rant and rave for a few minutes and then send them off to be flogged. And as for your revolutionary types, well, it's the rules of the game, isn't it, young Marcus? Marcus thought hard. Keep the peace, keep the revenues rolling in, keep Caesar happy. Excellent. And because your basic revolutionary messiah is all for starting trouble and disrupting trade and booting poor Caesar out of the country, what do? You crucify him. Simple as that. And so, Pilate concluded, grinning that grin and rubbing his hands together again, Let's see what kind of Messiah we have today. As Pilate entered the courtyard, he glanced at the prisoner. The man stood quiet and still. His hair was matted, his eyes tired. It looked as if someone had beaten him up. Next, he glanced at the crowd, then turned to his assistant and whispered, "All the big shots are here, the Jewish leaders and their council. I'm guessing that we've got your basic religious type Messiah to deal with." Finally, he turned to the crowd itself. "So tell me, what is this man charged with?" The accusation shot forth more fiercely than Pilate had ever heard them before. "He stirs up the nation. He tells us not to pay our taxes. He says he is Christ the King." "It seems like he's broken all the rules of the game," observed Marcus. Pilate just nodded. "So you want me to put him to death, is that it?" Pilate said to the crowd. "Well, let me talk with him first. It's Roman law that needs to be satisfied here. And it will keep them in their place," he whispered to Marcus. Pilate took the prisoner aside and looked him straight in his swollen and bloodshot eyes. "So you're king of the Jews then, are you?" "That's what they say," shrugged the prisoner. "Look," Pilate answered, "I don't care what they say. What I need to know is what you say. Are you the king of the Jews or not?" The prisoner sighed, as if he were tired, not from lack of sleep, but from lack of being understood. "I have a kingdom, yes, but it's not the kind of kingdom you're thinking of. If it were, my followers would be here fighting for me." Now it was Pilate's turn to sigh. "So let me get this straight," he continued. "You say you are a king then?" "You say that I am a king, but I was sent into this world for a different reason. I was sent to speak the truth." "Truth," chuckled Pilate. "Truth? Oh, what is truth?" Then he shook his head and walked back to his aide. "Well?" asked Marcus. "Well, he's not political, that's for sure. He doesn't strike me as your typical fanatic either. He's different, I'll grant you that. But he doesn't deserve to die." And that's what Pilate told the crowd. "I find no crime here, no crime at all." But if Pilate thought that would satisfy them, then he was wrong. They started shouting again, louder even than the first time. "But he's stirring up the people. It started up in Galilee, now it's spread all the way down here to Judea." "They obviously hate this man," Pilate whispered to Marcus, "and they're not going to go away until I do something." And then Pilate grinned and snapped his fingers. "Did you say he's from Galilee?" Pilate shouted to the crowd. "Well, that's not under my control. Herod Antipas is in charge in Galilee, and as it happens, he's here in town for your Passover meal. Why don't you take the prisoner to Herod and let him decide what to do?" The crowd grunted and moaned, but they were eager to have their way, so they grabbed the prisoner and dragged him off to see Herod. "There's another lesson for you," Pilate beamed. "When you're having trouble making a decision, or when a decision is likely to make trouble for you, pass the responsibility on to somebody else." Pilate escorted Marcus back into his office, but it wasn't long before Publius stuck his head into the room again. "It's that Messiah, Governor. I'm afraid he's back." "But what about Herod?" Pilate asked. "It seems he's learned that lesson about passing on difficult cases too." "He's a smarter man than I'd given him credit for," Pilate noted. "I'll have to invite him over sometime." Then he marched out into the courtyard, looking as official as possible. "I have already made my decision," he announced to the crowd. "This man has committed no crime. But the crowd would not be pacified, and they shouted even more loudly. All right, Pilate announced. How about this? Every year during your festival, I release a prisoner as a gesture of goodwill towards the community. Why don't I let this man go? No, shouted one of the priests. Free Barabbas instead. Barabbas? Asked Marcus. A thief and a murderer, explained Pilate, and also something of a local hero. And that is why the crowd began to chant, We want Barabbas! We want Barabbas! We want Barabbas! Oh, well, sighed Pilate. I hate to do it, but it's the rules of the game. All right, then, he announced to the crowd. I shall set Barabbas free. And then he pointed to the prisoner. But what shall I do with this man? Crucify him, the crowd chanted. Crucify him! But he's done nothing wrong, Pilate called back. He's made himself a king, someone shouted, and that makes him an enemy of the true king, Caesar. Yes, someone else shouted. So if you set him free, then that makes you Caesar's enemy too. The hypocrites, Pilate muttered to Marcus. They hate Caesar maybe even more than they hate this man. But it's obvious they're willing to say anything that will get him crucified. And frankly, I can't afford to let this crowd get any further out of hand. And so I suppose it comes down to the rules of the game once again. Even if you have to execute an innocent man? Asked Marcus. Pilate smiled. Well, I've thought of a way round that as well. Publius, fill me a basin of water and bring me a clean towel. Do you see this? Called Pilate to the crowd. I am innocent of this man's blood. Then he plunged his hands into the water and ordered his soldiers to beat the prisoner and take him off to be crucified. Nice touch, don't you think? Remarked Pilate once the crowd had gone. If I've made the right decision, then I'm the hero. And if I've made the wrong one, well, I think I'm covered there as well. Marcus was not convinced. But don't you worry that it makes you seem weak and indecisive? Not if I've kept my balance, smiled Pilate, sticking out his arms again. Now let's get back to work. The rest of the day was uneventful. Some of the Jewish leaders complained about the sign that had been nailed on the prisoner's cross. Someone else came by to claim the man's body once he died. And somewhere in the middle of the afternoon, the weather suddenly turned worse than anyone could remember. Well, what do you say, Marcus? Asked Pilate as they prepared at last to go home. A good day's work? I suppose so, sir, Marcus answered. But I can't help feeling just a little uncomfortable. I mean, we released a murderer and executed what looked like an innocent man. Yes, that's true, Pilate said. But did we win the game? That's the important question. And if you look at it that way, we did extraordinarily well. We kept the peace. We prevented a riot. And the dead man, sir? Ah, yes, mused Pilate, the dead man. Well, I don't think we'll be hearing from him again. Do you? So that's Bob Hartman's story of Pilate. He sees him as the baddie, and he's certainly mentioned in the creed, the Christian creed, when we say that Jesus suffered under Pontius Pilate. I personally still can't help feeling that he was a pawn. After all, Jesus came on earth as a human in order to die for our sins. And if Pilate hadn't executed him, what would have happened then? Who knows? Next week, there's another story about one of the baddies in the lead up to Easter. In the meantime, keep safe. God be with you.